Good deal.
Welcome, everyone. To session 12 of Build Pittsburgh 2021. Gonna wait a few more seconds. We've got people still trickling in here. Housekeeping notes. I feel like I'm sick of hearing myself say this, so you all must be. Please make sure you have both your first and last name listed in the participant list. It makes it very easy to report your continuing ed credits. I promise you will only have to hear me say this one more time if you're in session 13, and then it will be done. And with that, I think we can probably get started. So I would like to introduce Tyler Swar of Performance Roofing Associates. They are the sponsor of today's session. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Tyler.
Kira, thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity for us to be here. Folks, I won't take too much of your time to give you a little spiel before Mark gets to the interesting facts, but Performance Roofing Associates is, we are the JM commercial roofing representatives in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. We also represent Englert metal panels, as well as a few smaller lines, safety lines, things like that. Really a full service team that can help you with any of your flat roof or standing seam metal roof design and execution, and can really help the design community with any part of the process, from getting on the roof for a re-roof to take cores and give you a budget number or an analysis, through spec writing or review, code compliance, all the way through your pre-bid, whatever else you may need, whether it be just a quick phone call for a question or a full spec and roof review, and we can help you out with any part of it. But that's about all I have. We're here to help. Please remember that. And just honored to be a part of this great event for the third year in a row, and look forward to many more years. So thanks AIA and Kira for putting this on, and enjoy your session.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen properly. Thumbs up if you can. Great. Okay, good. Thank you. Let's get going here. Provider number A217, those of you who need it. This presentation is called the 2021 Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan, and it's specifically tailored to those of us in the built environment. What does it mean for us? And the learning objectives, we're going to talk about carbon and emissions. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania and our unique energy approach. We're going to talk about the climate action plan and what it's in response to, all the environmental factors that we're all living with, and what to expect for 2021, what's been happening legislatively. And then I'm going to also finish up by saying what you can do to get involved with regards to what the AIA is doing. It's not just lip service. The AIA really is moving towards climate action, and there's an opportunity for all of us to get involved. So what I would like for you to do is, first off, understand our energy profile here, why the climate action plan is important, what it means for you as practitioners in the built environment, and then how you can go ahead and apply these things. And then with any luck, we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So, for myself, Mark Mondor, a lot of you know me as principal of Evolve Environment Architecture. We're a green building and sustainability consulting and design firm located in Pittsburgh. Been around for 17 years. We have projects at every scale all over the place. It's an exciting time in our industry, and we're grateful. And we've worked with a lot of you guys, which is also very nice. I've also been involved with AIA Pittsburgh a good bit, served 2 full terms, founded the Pittsburgh Committee on the Environment about 8 years ago, or refounded it, if you will. and also serve as appointee to the Construction Legislative Council on behalf of AIA Pittsburgh. At AIA Pennsylvania, served 2 full terms there, but appointee to the Climate Change Advisory Committee, which you'll learn a lot more about. Chair of Government Affairs for 2 years. We'll talk about some of the legislation going on. Founding chair of the Pennsylvania Committee on the Environment. President last year, and current chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, which we just formed last year as in response to our current zeitgeist, and also chair of our Political Action Committee. At the same time, on the national side, there's also so now we're talking about 95,000 members, not just 3,000 AIA members. Presentations at grassroots, large states, SGN, climate summit conferences, and I'm also an appointee to the Climate Action and Design Excellence Committee, which has just been founded this year. So, all right, enough about that, only just to tell you where I'm coming from. Let's talk about Pennsylvania's energy context. So with regards to emissions, a lot of you may know that Pennsylvania is a large producer of energy, I think is an understatement. We're the 3rd largest emitter of CO2 emissions, and that's largely by virtue of how much energy we produce. And if you take a look at how much we export, we're actually the #1 exporter of electricity across the country. So when you take a look at a map of our state and you see how it's all wrinkled topographically, and we don't have any lakes, we just have rivers, it's really because of this massive geological formations that have occurred, which has been really a boon for us if you think about it. A pioneer in coal, and that goes back 300 years. Pioneer in oil, first oil wells about close to 200 years ago. First nuclear power plant, that was about 60 years ago. And now, of course, we're leading the way with regards to gas exploration and hydraulic fracturing. So it's not an exaggeration to say that energy is a core part of our Pennsylvania identity. It's right up there with our identity and our Constitution and what it means to be American and so forth. And so you find that a lot of this fossil fuel is no laughing matter to a lot of people. It's really a matter of livelihood. It's a matter of what Pennsylvania stands for. And so when we're talking about things that may make crystal clear sense, like renewables and energy efficiency, a lot of people are kind of skeptical about that. And so this is why the arguments that we make have to really be rock solid and rooted in facts. So here's a diagram, a Sankey diagram, if you will, of sources and uses with regards to energy for the state. Left-hand side is the sources, and then the right-hand side in the pink there is the end users, and you can see they've been broken out by residential, commercial. Now that pertains to us as architects, as well as industrial, and then of course transportation. And so if you take a look at how that actually breaks out, you've got basically the bigger the lines, the more important they are. You see natural gas here as being a big bright line. You see petroleum as a big bold line. You see nuclear as a big line. You see a little yellow line for solar. And so you see how that goes. It kind of makes its way off to the right. Stands to reason that petroleum at the bottom would be almost entirely for transportation, but also some for residential homes, also for industrial. Now, the box in the middle up top, electricity generation, is really important because that is how we get the electricity that we use. So you see how this has been broken up. The sources go into that, and then we use that for everything that we plug in. So, if we're talking about appliances, we're talking about our laptops and everything else, everything we're using today, for instance, lighting and so forth, that all comes out of that. And this is important because there's a big move towards electrification. In fact, it's part of a national platform on behalf of the AIA to move buildings towards electrification. So when you look at electric generation, which is called secondary energy for that reason, it's kind of between the primary and the end user. In our case, we have about a 38% coal, 19% gas. Now, these are steadily eroding from each other. Gas is taking up coal's share to where gas is actually, coal is dwindling, gas is rising. Nuclear is an interesting one, about 40% as well, because we have 9 nuclear reactors, 8 now that 3 Mile Island has been actually shuttered. And the future of nuclear is in doubt because it is constantly being priced out by gas. And so the gas industry likes that because you can't just turn a nuclear power plant back on. Once it's off, it's off. And so that's something that's also of tremendous concern. The thing that you're looking at right here, this map is the PJM grid. It originally started with about 4 states, or PJM. Now it's actually in 13 states, including DC. So it's grown to be pretty much the most important grid in the country, and we're right in the thick of it. With regards to nuclear, which we just talked about, solar is actually growing, of course, but it's still a very fledgling part of our overall energy diet. So by end use sector, we have about 23% residential, 17 commercial. So it's about 40% altogether. Then industrial, transportation. So you get the idea. Roughly, people break that up into thirds: a third building, third industrial, third for transportation. And that's the case here in Pennsylvania. We're using more and more energy, even though we're getting efficient. It's because we have more people, our GDP is high, standard of living is higher. We're traveling further, we have larger homes on average, about twice as big as they were 50 years ago, more consumer goods, energy is cheaper and easy access. Okay, so let's get into Pennsylvania itself. We talked about where the energy comes from. Why is it important to have a climate action plan? What is a climate action plan? If you took a look at some of these images, and these images come from the impact assessment, which is created every year as mandated by law. And so Penn State does the heavy lifting on this. But you can see from left to right, let's just take the top row, that's days with temperatures of over 90 degrees. Back in the last century, not very often. By mid-century of this century, it's going to grow a lot more, and then by the end of the century, much more when you go from left to right. Days with very heavy precipitation at the bottom, same sort of thing. From left to right, it gets more and more intense. And so, this is not a matter of religion or theology or politics. This is a matter of facts, biology, physics, chemistry. And so this is happening right now. And this is what we're all living through. So tangible impacts of this are larger storms, more frequent storms, but also more extremes. So larger periods of drought, which impact food harvests. Cloud bursts, you might have the same amount of rainfall in a day, but instead of falling over 8 hours, it might fall in 2.5 hours. And what that means is now you have flooding and overflowing of gutters, things like that. Flooding inland, wetlands drying, pest migration upwards, impact to ecosystems, human health impacts too. It's an awful lot to endure intense 90-degree days, day after day after day after day. And this is something that elderly or marginalized populations are having to deal with more and more. And then infrastructure impacts, which also affects us as architects. So think of all the bridges, the dams, the roads, everything that gets impacted by these things, and it makes them a lot more vulnerable. And then recreation areas. Think how many good skiing days we've had this year, and compare that to 15, 20 years ago. So there's less and less ski days that we're having getting to enjoy. So the state auditor, Dick Pasquale, says, hey, what's going on here? I've got a budget of $15 million a year to deal with these types of emergencies, and I'm having to spend $150 million year after year. What's going on? And so there are hearings in order to try to get testimony, facts about what's going on with regards to climate change. And then this impact assessment I just mentioned, Governor Wolf, and well, it was just released about 2 weeks ago, May 5th. Some of you may have seen it. But the big blaring headline on that is that Pennsylvania's temperature will rise 5.9 degrees Fahrenheit by mid-century. So everyone's talking about the Paris Climate Accords, 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius. This equates to 3.3 degrees Celsius, and this is what we're going to have in the next 30 years. So all of these things I mentioned are actually going to be exacerbated. It's not a linear rise, it's actually an exponential rise, and we're all living through it as we speak. So this is why a climate action plan is a good idea, because not only are we making ourselves aware of the climate sources, but we're able to identify them, or we're able to try to mitigate. And when we say climate, it's really essentially emissions, carbon into the atmosphere. You can substitute methane and things like that, but carbon, since it's so dominant and it's directly linked to human industry, carbon is really what we count, CO2. So if you do this right, you can save energy, you can save money, therefore, You can improve air quality because you're generating less, and you can protect natural resources. So this climate action plan is intended to be a win-win. We're able to reduce emissions. We're able to figure out how to mitigate it. We're able to figure out how to adapt to it because these things are happening, and we're able to counter the human health impacts as well. So the Pennsylvania Climate Action Plan came about because of the Climate Change Act, Act 70 back in 2008. And basically it asked for the formation of a climate change advisory committee, and then a climate action plan that occurs every 3 years, and then an inventory of GHG emissions to be updated every single year. And so these are some of the things I've just mentioned. The inventory occurred sporadically, but then since 2000, it's been every single year. 2005 is the base year, and that seems to just be a norm around the country. That's just the year that seems to be convenient back when we generated an awareness about this. And so ever since then, we've had that as the base year. So you'll see climate action plans that are really based around 2005. Even the Pittsburgh 2030 district is based around 2005. Architecture 2030 is based around 2005. You get the idea. So the partners for the climate action plan then are the DEP, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, as the primary client and for this. There's also the DCNR that's involved, the DCED that's involved. And then the Climate Change Advisory Committee serves as an advisory group to the DEP, and it's made up of a group of appointed professionals that are supposed to give a broad representation. So if you want to take a look at some of these things I'm going to show you, pa.dep.gov is really the website that has a lot of this information. So our Climate Change Advisory Committee is made up of 20 different people. And these are delegates or appointees by the governor and then by the 4 caucuses of Senate minority, Senate majority, House majority, House minority. I'm personally appointed by the Senate minority leader, and I've been on this climate change advisory committee for 5 years. I have Joe Morinville, who some of you may have known and have worked with EIS as my alternate. When I first joined, I was one of just a couple people from Western PA, other people being from Range Resources and from the Marcellus Shale Coalition. In the last year or two, I've been joined by Lindsay Baxter from Duquesne Light. I've been joined by Kim McDonald from Covestro, and most recently, Representative Sarah Namorato from here in Pittsburgh. So there's a little bit more representation now, which has been nice. So the work to date, I mentioned the 2008 Act 70, which formed the Climate Action Plan. And then every 3 years, like clockwork, there's a Climate Action Plan. 2018 is the most recent one, and I'm going to rely upon that. Obviously, we're working on the 2021 Climate Action Plan, and these are going to go forward. Every 3 years makes sense. As you all know, building codes are every 3 years, and so it is with this too. There's just so much grinding that needs to occur in order to really make it a relevant document. 3 years is a happy balance. So as this was happening, back in 2009, Governor Wolf issued an executive order in the absence of federal leadership, quote unquote, at that particular time. And the thing he did here that was golden was establish goals of GHG, greenhouse gas reductions, by the state of 26% by 2025, 80% by 2080. 80% by 2080 is the classic 2050 goal. And 26% by 2025 is, of course, right around the corner now. The other thing that his executive order did is reestablish the Green Government Council. Some of you may remember it from the late 90s. It was established by Governor Ridge and was really helpful to establish performance guidelines for high performance buildings and things like that. Disbanded under, well, Corbett, I guess, but now it's back again, which is great. So this is what the 2018 document looks like. Again, that website that I just gave you, you can go there, look it up, download it. It's meant to be public. So as much as I'd love to tell you I'm giving you a sneak peek, most of what I'm sharing with you is out there. The way the 2018 plan was organized is by sector. So there's 7 sectors: recommended strategies, recommended actions, cost benefit of these actions. So while they might be good things to do, how much is it going to cost us? How much is it going to benefit us? Then what are the key performance indicators for these? And then what are the cross-cutting opportunities? What strategies can we do that cut across different sectors, different silos? So the sectors themselves: energy consumption, energy production, agriculture, ecosystem, forestry, outdoor recreation, tourism, waste management, water resources, and human health. And of these, energy consumption is where the built environment is. It has to do with, that's, I mean, I didn't make up the rule, but that's kind of how it's been tucked away. So that's the part that we kind of look at. Now, since 2005, the big changes that we've had have been the emergence of hydraulic fracturing, fracking, as we all know. And right here in Pittsburgh, we're kind of ground zero for it. We're at the kind of the tip of the Appalachians, and it goes down for about 4 states. So Power of 32, the Marshall Plan, the Green New Deal, a lot of these things are centered right around us here. And so with the emergence of hydraulic fracturing, we have a shift away from coal too. Some people say this is due to regulations. This is due to just good old-fashioned economics. Coal is being priced out, and that's really kind of inevitable. Now, with regards to our emissions out of 2005, the amount is 291 million metric tons. That's kind of the key number that we're trying to reduce against. As of 2015, it was 257. Our goal for 2025 is 215. Our goal for 2050, which would be 80% or 20% of that, is 58. So now we're working on the 2021 Climate Action Plan, and where we find ourselves right now in May is you can see we're almost there. In June at our next meeting, we're going to get the presentation of the final Climate Action Plan. We've heard, we've given feedback, we've provided expert or testimony, we've had expert input. And so basically this fall is when you can expect the 2021 Climate Action Plan to be released. The approach to creating the Climate Action Plan starts with BAU, business as usual. Business as usual is if we don't do anything policy-wide, just let market forces take care of themselves. So my comment just now about coal kind of going away is due to market forces. It has nothing to do with policy. And so they start with that, and then prioritizing reduction strategies, developing adaptation pathways, evaluating costs, and then developing the implementation steps. So that makes sure that everything that's in the plan is actually distilled down to something usable. Might not be usable on the micro scale. These might be macro recommendations. In fact, they typically are, but there's still recommendations all the same that can be applied. Okay, so as far as where we find ourselves today, the conclusion of this plan that's forthcoming, I'd love to tell you, I'm showing you something sneak peek here, but if you look on that website, you can probably find this PowerPoint presentation that was presented at the last meeting. So you can find this information here, but I'm distilling it for you. The very top bullet point says Pennsylvania will come close to our 26% goal, 25.4%. So that's very close. And some of that has to do with good policy, but some of that has to do with the fact, like I was saying, gas is outpricing coal, and it's a much cleaner fuel for the same amount of energy. With regards to the 80% by 2050, though, that's going to be much harder to meet. So we've kind of enjoyed the silver bullet of the gas displacing coal, the same way we've all enjoyed the silver bullet of LED fixtures replacing the old inefficient incandescent bulbs. Now we have to dig harder. So we have 2 scenarios here on how we can get to those goals by 2050. Business as usual on the left. What you have in the green is renewables. What you have in the blue is gas. What you have in the red is nuclear. And what you have in the dark blue is coal. You can see how coal is kind of dwindling away by itself. It doesn't go away, but it's basically costs too much to bring it out of the ground and transport it and combust it, whether it's by direct employee expense or health impacts. Nuclear is constant, but you remember I mentioned earlier that we have nuclear that is going to be getting phased out because of these 8 reactors, 4 plants. Some of them are going to be at their useful lives by the end of this, but the direction to the consultant has been keep it constant. And then you have gas kind of picking up that slack. Essentially, gas picks up coal's slack, and that's why it's so large. Now, in the right-hand scenario, which is where we're meeting the 80% by 2050, you kind of have gas going away. Now, don't know how realistic that is, but that would be what some policy might lead to. Don't know if that's actually feasible or going to happen, but that's kind of the policy aspect of it. So to get there, here we have our waterfall diagram. 2005, you have that 289 million metric tons of CO2. And then the way that we can get down to 57 on the right-hand side, here I can use this, 57% on the right-hand side is that 20%. So we have this classic waterfall of transportation, then buildings, hey, that's us. Then electricity generation, which is also kind of us, because if we're looking to the future, buildings aren't just for housing people. Buildings are actually storage plants, energy storage, energy batteries, if you will. That's what the forward thinking is looking at. Then you have fuel supply, industrial, land use, which is really carbon storage, and then waste. So these are more or less negligible. Electricity generation is huge. Buildings is pretty big, and transportation is huge. So these three right here are really going to be the key to getting energy emissions down by 2050. With regards to what that means, if we break that out, the carbon-free grid, everyone talks about infrastructure and how we need a more efficient grid. Well, here we are. This is a lot of that. If we can redo the infrastructure, our electricity, our energy grid, a lot of efficiency there. Increase industrial energy efficiency, fuel switching, from coal to gas and so forth. Transportation, building electrification. Now that's a big one. Incentivizing building electrification actually leads to a lot of emissions reductions. And other than that, I wanted to point out on-site solar, 5.8, that's significant. Residential and commercial energy efficiency. And so energy codes is down here. You'd think energy codes would play a larger part, but here we are. It took us a long time. Now we're on the energy code for 2015. 2018 has been reviewed by the RAC, and that's going to become actually usable, enacted in the beginning of 2022. And that's really by the design of Act 36. That law made it about a 4.5 year lag for Pennsylvania. And that's just the way that goes. So you see the idea here, though, is that buildings and efficient buildings have a big role to play. So if you put that graphically, then the dark line at the top is business as usual. So you see how business as usual is doing really well to get us to 2025, but it's not doing much to get us to 2050. In fact, if anything, it's just as bad. So then that's where these reduction by sector come in. Transportation, buildings, and electricity generation are the big ones. And then after that, you've got the others. So basically 30% of the total reductions to 2050 are going to be by business as usual. So that's just market forces, but 70% are going to take direct policy enactment. Okay, so how was this done? Let me talk about the plan a little bit, just to give you some context. REMI is the software tool that the contractor, ICF, used in order to come up with the economics associated with these different strategies. They're also looking at GSP, the gross state product, which is, think of it as a GDP, but for Pennsylvania, disposable personal income, and then jobs as well, employment. So employment here, we always hear a lot of talk about green jobs. Well, no surprise. A lot of us have been talking about how green jobs have been rising about 6 to 8% reliably year after year. And this is while fossil fuel jobs are kind of flagging or lagging. Green jobs, notably energy efficiency and renewables, are on the ascent. And so this gives you an idea of not just that total number, but where those jobs are coming from. The blue is buildings, so that's people like us working on these things, fuel supply, and then transportation, a lot of transportation jobs. Okay, so next moving on to adaptation. Adaptation strategy basically was done by foundational, then looking at the categories and then specific examples. So it's kind of a throughput. So slides like this have a lot of information. I'm not gonna go or expect to go through all of these. It's only to show you the sort of dynamic that the type, then the example, and then at the very top to let you know what this is looking at. So this current plan of 2021 is looking at heat and flooding and those impacts on health. And then we have the impact of heat and flooding on overburdened and vulnerable populations. So think of people who are in dense urban neighborhoods with a heavy urban heat island, no trees, no shading, or people who don't have enough disposable income to heat or cool themselves properly. So this is the health aspect that pertains to a lot of this, and this is new to the 2021 plan. So heat in Philadelphia, we might look at Pittsburgh and think we have problems, but Philadelphia is probably 10 times the scale, just a much larger city. And then impacts on forests, ecosystem, and wildlife. Impacts of a changing climate on built infrastructure. So we're talking about roads, bridges, we're talking about buildings too. Some of you who just saw the presentation about the building in Kane, that's a good example of a building that gets exposed to all 4 cycles. And so a lot of that, freeze thaw cycle, extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme freeze, so forth. That's a much more stress on the buildings that we design and build. And then the impacts of landslides on built infrastructure. Landslides are a part of climate change. If we thought that might have been funny 5-10 years ago, ask the people on Route 30 where we're getting landslides in our own county here. So this is a case study in the Climate Action Plan as well, mapping landslides in Allegheny County. Okay, and then lastly, the implementation approach. So the implementation looks at challenges and opportunities, implementation principles, is it equitable, and then monitoring and evaluation, which is a new wrinkle as well. How can we track these things? What are the key performance indicators, and who are the key stakeholders to do that? So some of the challenges are the costs. So a lot of these things take cost. I prefer to think of them as investments, of course, for the most part, because they pay back. They might not pay back, or they'll pay back in a direct financial way, but they'll also pay back in a triple bottom line way: better health, better outcomes for the environment. Also, a political will and resistance to change. It's not just that politicians are obstinate, but like I said at the very outset, there's a lot of entrenched inertia with regards to changing anything about our fossil fuel economy. Okay, and then with regards to opportunities, opportunities are to increase jobs and expand business. So a lot of green jobs like we were just talking about. And of course, resiliency. If anything, if COVID has taught us anything, it's how paper thin certain parts of our society and our interrelationships are. So the idea to build resiliency in terms of not just social systems, but also environmental systems and the life systems, food and water and all the things that we need. A lot of this thinking helps that, as well as the infrastructure momentum that's coming forward, coming our way. Increasing equity, I mentioned some of that on the socioeconomic side, increasing environmental and health benefits, and then optimizing land use as well. So basically looking for buildings that are more efficient per square foot. And then the idea of having this be equitable and beneficial in terms of the implementation. Okay, so that's the climate plan in an overview, and the difference between 2018 and 2021. Let's talk about what this means for the built environment. So for the 2025 goals, you can see the reductions that are expected of the strategies that were in the 2018 plan. You see I have the 2018 here. These figures just haven't been created just yet for the 2021 plan. They will be soon. You can see the expected savings, but for 2050, these are much larger. Sustainable transportation is a much larger piece of the pie, but energy efficiency and energy conservation and codes are much more important. And what does that mean? Updating building codes. That's a no-brainer. In terms of, every code gets more stringent, of course, because it responds to the available technology that's accessible. And so that increases as we do our jobs. Expanding Act 129. Act 129 is a great law that a lot of us have benefited from, basically incentivizing us for reducing energy usage. And when we went from incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs, that was a great boon. But Act 129 was also created back in 2008. It's very long in the tooth. It has things that were, I don't want to say loopholes, but let's just say it's very easy to meet now. There's a cap on how much the utilities have to incentivize. We need to get rid of the caps. We need to upgrade Act 129. The idea here also, one of the recommendations was create an Act 129 program for natural gas. Not sure if that's going to happen. And then of course, energy efficiency for industrial operations. So if you summarize all these strategies, I don't want to read them all to you, except to tell you that the very first two columns are energy conservation and energy production. So like I said, these have to do specifically with the built environment and transportation. But this particular diagram here, if you want to read it, like I said, it's available online. With regards to energy use, though, energy consumption, you can see increase energy end use, conservation and efficiency. And so you've got expand home weatherization programs, increase support for market trends for energy efficient technologies and so forth. So a lot of these are good common sense things that you have. Implement sustainable transportation follows that. But the nice thing about this plan is that it's not just the suggestions and strategies, it's that every single one of these strategies has the amount of GHGs that would be reduced, and then the amount of cost savings, so cost per ton reduced. So there are financial ramifications for this, and that's one of the key things about the plan. So it's not just motherhood and apple pie, good things to do. It also makes the economic argument for doing them. And certain things are such no-brainers that you're losing money by not doing them. One thing in the 2018 plan, and I'm proud of this because I've pushed hard to help get solar in there, is that there's the distributed solar and PVs as a strategy as well. And you can see by the use of distributed photovoltaics, again, the market is going to help carry that a bit. As a matter of fact, you have the price of the cost of installed wattage roughly the same, almost at grid parity with fossil fuel, but with a little bit more, let's just say, enabling legislation, we could be doing much more. So here's the upside of this. By 2050, we'd be looking at a significant savings of metric tons of CO2 if we're able to use photovoltaics, because that offsets the energy production as well, and it creates local jobs. For us as architects, it's extremely important because building integrated photovoltaics or even roof-mounted photovoltaics increases the asset value of what we do. It lowers the operating costs because you actually are creating an electron farm right on your roof. And so by reducing the amount of energy that you're using, you're decreasing your costs, which increases your value. And you're also shaving peaks because the time that you're creating the most energy is when you would be having the highest demand charges, those hot summer days. So this is what we expect to be a nice big boon should it continue to go. So here's the McKinsey graph I was telling you about with regards to how all of these different strategies stack up. If it's negative on the bottom side of this graph, it means you're losing money by not doing it. Now, if you look at this big green one here, reduce vehicle miles traveled and increase fuel efficiency. Okay, well, that's kind of Captain Obvious. Obviously, if we drive less and we increase fuel efficiency, we're going to be able to save a lot of energy. But at the same time, this is one of those things that the sooner we do it, the better off we are. Next up, energy codes. Again, we're losing money by not upgrading them. Residential and commercial energy efficiency also. Now, when you get to 0, the idea is that anything up there requires some money, but we also have this factor here. This dashed line takes into account the social cost of carbon. Back under the Obama administration, the EPA established a social cost of carbon as $36 per ton. Here by 2050, it's going to be about $113 a ton. Well, you can't ignore that. So that actually creates the baseline by which you also want to be judging. So these different strategies here are also investments, and that's how you have to look at these things. What is this one here that's expensive? Implement a low carbon fuel standard. And for some, and that one there is a lot of money, but it will actually pay back a lot of money as well. So you can kind of see how these things stack up here in terms of the immediate return on money. So things from the plan, the Climate Action Plan has a comprehensive view. One of the things we started looking at this year as well is what we call fugitive emissions. Basically, believe it or not, Pennsylvania has about 200,000 abandoned wells that are all basically needles in the ground that have been abandoned over the last 150 years that are all emitting methane. So, you know, or not all of them, excuse me, but a lot of them are. And so that's very tough. There's not even a good map of where they all are. You can find them by LiDAR, but that's hard to do, and it's expensive to do. One of the things in the infrastructure plan that's supposed to be coming our way, if it does, is plugging up those holes. So the Climate Action Plan is a comprehensive view of how carbon basically is the thread that runs through our lives. Carbon reduction goals are essential. When Governor Wolf gave us those goals of 26% and 80%, it really gave a lot of heft to these climate action plans. Carbon reduction is also good business. Like I said, a lot of this actually increases the bottom line or lowers operating costs, which increases the asset value of the buildings that we're working on. 2018 plan included adaptability for the first time, not just mitigation. So basically saying, okay, we want to reduce, but we have to adapt. And we're seeing all these different things, whether it's from Superstorm Sandy or whether it's from Hurricane Ivan, whether we have 500-year storms that seem to be happening every 2 years. And that's statistically true a lot of places. So these things were all part of the 2018 plan. Now for the 2021 plan, we're also looking at health impacts. I think I mentioned some of that with regards to environmental justice as well. So the health impacts with regards to food production, shortened growing seasons, but also with regards to more extreme weather, extreme droughts, extreme heat waves, things like that. And also, we will have an active price for carbon. This is something we've been advocating for a while. New with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, coming our way. I'll talk about that more in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about the efforts here and the opportunities to get involved. Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania committees on the environment. Hope you don't mind my plug here, but we're all working together. So I mentioned the Committee on the Environment getting kind of launched or relaunched a few years ago. We started with this AIA Plus 2030 events schedule. So it was like a decathlon of educating people on how to, educating ourselves about how to deliver these buildings. So our thinking was that if we had the demand for these types of buildings coming from efforts like the Green Building Alliance and Architecture 2030, we wanted to make sure we had the supply of talent to meet that. And that's what this room was. So it was great. We had it took a lot of effort and planning, but about 30 people who went all the way through, gained expertise doing this, and started from the general to the specific and back out again. It also became a revenue generator for the AIA. That was followed up by a series of lectures called COAT Intensives, which also had an impact. Tours, engagement, this is the dual skin curtain wall of PNC Tower. And then, as some of you may know, right now, as we speak, is the COAT series on the Framework for Design Excellence, which the AIA has nationally decreed as the measure by which to gauge good design. So it's not a contest of the most beautiful photographs. It's actually how well is the building going to perform 20 years from now? How well did it integrate the community? How deeply involved are these solutions, and how are they linked together? So there's 10 aspects to the Framework for Design Excellence. And so the way that the COAT broke this up was looking at people, and then place, and then planet, the 3 E's, so 3 P's. So stay tuned for that and attend if you haven't already. It's a great group. So meanwhile, that's AIA Pittsburgh. AIA Pennsylvania established a committee. And like I mentioned, the argument at the state level is very different than the argument in Pittsburgh or even in Philadelphia, where you have climate action plans, you have mandatory benchmarking legislation, you have 2030 districts, you have living buildings. When you get 10 miles out in any direction, it's kind of a different discussion. So what we did here is created a vision statement for what we wanted for this committee to be. And largely it consists of recognizing buildings and projects and teams and using case studies and educating. And then secondly, advocating for legislation that impacts the sustainability things that we're after. As an architect, easily 80% of the legal and legislative activity that impacts you is at the state level. Local's too little, federal is too slow, too broad, but the state level is where it's at, because that's where licensure is, that's where permitting is, That's where codes are. So all of these things are extremely important. Every 2 years, AIA Pennsylvania releases a survey to all 3,000 members to fill out and determines legislative priorities so they know what to fight for. So number one, encroachment on the practice of architecture. Number two, green buildings and sustainability. Number three, building codes. So this is what membership wants, and this is what our leadership, our lobbyists and legislative approaches are pursuing. So legislative action that we've seen, I mentioned the governor's executive order establishing those climate action goals. Act 36, which I also mentioned, has upgraded our codes to where 2015 is our baseline. And at the time, there was a 2018 carve out for Philadelphia specifically. In 2022, we're all going to be on 2018 as we enter 2022. And so we'll always be 4.5 years behind. This was a heavy duty lift because there was a lot of opposition to increasing codes or having codes be understandable at all. A certain aspect of the construction industry has really been trying to muddy that. And so we're very excited that we have something that's predictable. Yeah, I'm sure we would all agree on that. Act 40 actually helped establish solar borders, which is important for the our native or Pennsylvania-based photovoltaics. And then CPACE, which some of you may be aware of. This was an enabling legislation for the commercial property assessment for clean energy. This is a dynamic new funding tool that's available to fund certain strategies, whether it's photovoltaics or energy recovery systems or even better envelopes. If you can determine that there is an increment for it, you can actually finance it in a way that takes it off the books. So it's not part of the construction budget, but rather it's something that's financed by the property. Why would you want that? Because you can have it be a 20 or a 30-year loan that therefore has much lower operating costs and it's part of the property itself. So this is something that Allegheny County has just approved within the last year, and we're starting to get some projects coming through. Act 40 with the solar borders, I mentioned. What we did in this one here is we put borders around Pennsylvania because our alternative energy portfolio standard allowed for our photovoltaic needs to be met by any one within that 13 state PJM boundary. So basically 72% of the solar energy going to fulfill our federal or our state commitment was coming from North Carolina. So what Act 40 did was close that and said, okay, let's have these RECs and their value of solar renewable energy credits be here from Pennsylvania. And so this orange line here shows the value of RECs, solar RECs, going from 35 to 50% of the, just within 1 year. So what a difference it makes to have passed that particular law. So it's kind of how it should be. Our borders have all set up their own borders. I mean, our neighbors have all set up their borders, so we should too. Okay, and lastly, and this is the big one, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, you may have heard of, is actually, well, coming to town. But basically, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative was formed about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. It's our 9 Northeast neighbors here. And it's basically a sort of consortium of energy usage, and Pennsylvania joining it as a cap and trade group. Basically, there's now a price that's going to be assessed on energy that's generated by these energy generating units. So when we talked about that secondary sector early on, this is what that is. RGGI applies directly to those units that are creating electricity for us to use. So electricity generating units. And so there would be a sort of cap and invest program on this. Excuse me. So the governor has passed this through his executive order 201907, so 2 years ago. But the legislature has passed a bill against it, which of course the governor vetoed. So we're still going through with RGGI. And what this looks like is that, you know, by by having a cap and trade and therefore putting a value on carbon, which is what this does. Without it, you don't really have a value on carbon. Now you do. You're able to actually drive, you know, the cost of carbon or the cost of emissions up, which incentivizes energy efficiency. Prior to this, there was really no incentive for energy efficiency other than what the market could provide. So what this means then is as Reggie comes through and it's expected to be enacted or put into place in January of 2022, we're expected to have the benefits of that cap and trade. Conservative estimate is $240 million a year, and that's a lot. More liberal estimates are like $300 million a year, and that's moving forward. So there are roundtables that have been convened, and AIA Pennsylvania has been asked to participate in some of these, which is great. So about half of that money is going to go towards communities. So the carbon coal mining communities that are going to be displaced, a lot of that money goes towards helping smooth the rough edges and transition to the clean economy. And then the other buckets, which are roughly 25 and 25% of that 240 million, are focused on clean energy and renewable energy, and then a focus on building efficiency and industrial efficiency. And so this right here is, I think, a Jamboard of some of the ideas that we kind of gave to the DEP in order to have them kind of implement what we're trying to do. Okay, lastly, I'm going to share with you what this means on the national level. The big move is that AIA nationally has moved towards climate and climate action, carbon reduction in a big way. This isn't just the whim of a particular president and it changes the next year. This has been codified into basically most everything that the AIA does. It's really impressive to see this big group from 1857 of 95,000 members kind of shift this big, this fast. So the climate imperative basically treats this as a one design problem with 7 billion clients on it. And the idea is that we can play an active part in reducing carbon. In fact, if we don't, the entire industry is going to go on right past us. So the United States used about 18% of the world's energy in 2015, but we're about 5% of the world's population. So it's a good opportunity for us to show leadership in this way. So survey-wise, nationally, AIA did some surveys, and the top garner of votes, if you will, was sustainability. And then rating systems by popularity: LEED, Living Building Challenge, Passive House, then WELL. So these have been rating systems that architects have used. And then thought leaders: U.S. Green Building Council, then AIA Committee on the Environment, then Architecture 2030, then ASHRAE. So you can see how those resources are regarded. So, all right, this is my last slide, and then I'll open up to questions and answers. And perfect, we have about 10 minutes left anyway. Wanted to try to make the case or explain how Pennsylvania's, our particular case, we're a little bit unique. Maybe some of you didn't know that we're the #3 exporter of energy among all states, and we're the #1 exporter of electricity. Maybe some of you didn't know that this climate action plan existed or thought it was more of an academic exercise. It's actually a meaningful way to drive policy direction, because when this is done, and it's not just done by the DEP or policy folks or government employees, it actually has this climate change advisory committee made up of these broad-based practitioners who are out there every day helping to advise. And the climate change advisory committee is actually broad because it's got fossil fuel advocates on one side, but it's got Penn Future and the DVGBC on the other side. And so you've kind of got, and the architects happen to be in the middle with Steve Krug, architect out of Philadelphia, as chair, and me, myself, as vice chair. So we're kind of acting as the fulcrum for this very broad committee that can be unwieldy at times. So that's what the climate action plan is moving forward. Also wanted to impress upon you the built environment and our role in it and the role we can play. It's not just that getting a LEED plaque is ho-hum, let's make a building a little bit better. It's that if we're all rowing in the same direction and standardizing the tools that we use and working together to build on these things, not only are we helping move the entire industry forward, we can actually firmly establish Pittsburgh as a leader. And then lastly, I wanted to tell you what the AIA is doing with regards to climate change at the local, state, and national levels. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions, if you guys would like.
Feel free to unmute yourselves, or if you feel more comfortable, you can chat your question.
Hey, Mark.
So,
Thank
Ken,
you for all your amazing leadership in this round, first off. It's really remarkable. I have actually a pretty simple question, which is, as somebody who's put so much time and energy and effort into this, how have you as a practice managed to integrate that into maintaining your fiscal responsibility to yourself as a practice? Because I'm stunned by how much energy and time you personally have put towards this and are supported on this. And it's extraordinarily impressive, and I thank you for it. But that's a very valid and important question.
Ken, I don't know if that was a softball or if I owe you one, but thank you for asking. Those of you who don't know Evolve, like I said, we're a green building and sustainability consulting and design firm. So one of the values that we offer our clients is an understanding of what energy efficiency or carbon or health outcomes or the green building frameworks mean in the overall scheme of things. So our firm really looks at things in terms of systems, the building systems in terms of the dynamics of year after year, the social systems in terms of community interaction and facilitation and communication, but also urban systems, so transportation, stormwater, energy production, and so some of our eco districts work has related to that. So Ken, to answer that question, yeah, obviously we're not getting paid for this, but it is something that our clients hope that we have or expect us to have, and the more we can speak to these things with some level of certainty and knowledge, the more valuable we are for the projects that we work on. So it's an investment as well.
Any other questions for Mark?
Well, I'll just, this is Tom. I'll just make a smart remark. I'm good at those. Ken, the truth is that Mark is depending on his wife to bring in the income. And if the two of them ever start talking to each other, they'll find out how much trouble they're in. Because she's doing the same kind of public service, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, she's busy.
Any other questions?
Are you laughing at she's busy? I think everybody on this.
I'm
call
just
knows that
laughing
she's
at Tom's
extremely
entire
busy.
comment.
What I live for is getting a laugh.
We have a few more minutes if there are any other questions for Mark. Okay, well then I guess that's a wrap. Thank you, Mark, for lending your expertise today. And thank you again to Langen for sponsoring this session. We have one more session to go for Build Pittsburgh, and then we hope that you will all join us for the virtual cocktail hour. We have a few surprises in store, so if you have it in your calendar, stop on by.
Cool.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for your time, everybody. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.